There are withdrawals that make no sound, no tears, no farewells, yet the aftermath they leave behind can be far greater than even the most dramatic goodbyes, because the one who leaves utters no blame. Nor do they need anyone to understand them. They simply choose to step away, quietly and deliberately, as if absence is the clearest answer to something that no longer feels right. We often associate departure with betrayal, indifference, or coldness. But what if, sometimes, withdrawal is the most profound expression of courage? Courage to no longer maintain a role that slowly fractures one's soul. Courage to step outside a familiar circle where one's presence is only valued as long as it serves someone else's needs. To withdraw, not because one wants to disappear, but one no longer wishes to exist as a shadow in someone else's story. No longer wants to be defined by things they never chose, and no longer wishes to maintain a connection that has turned into unconscious dependence. When you withdraw, people don't just lose a person, they lose a pillar, a mirror, a place onto which they projected their unformed expectations. And that is what makes your silence so unsettling, not because you were too important, but because the space you leave behind forces others to confront themselves. And that is where this journey begins, not one about breaking, but about awakening, for both sides, the one who walks away and the one who remains. 1. The power of withdrawal. The empty space doesn't make them miss you, it forces them to face themselves. There is a kind of disappearance that doesn't slam the door. No tears, no dramatic farewells. It's a quiet retreat, silent, gentle as a breath, but it leaves a void that echoes like a bell in an abandoned cathedral. When you step out of someone's life, even without anger or resentment, something strange happens. Their world trembles, not because they truly miss you, but because your absence disrupts an unspoken mechanism where they had been using you as a mirror. Humans don't see each other as they truly are, but as they need the other to be. Every hug, every time you listened, every time you swept up the emotional debris for them, over time, they assigned you a role. And that role wasn't truly you, but a projection of the avoidance within them. You were the place they ran from themselves, a vessel into which they poured their expectations, their fears, their unnamed wounds. So when you withdraw, it's not just a person walking away, it's an entire coping structure collapsing. You thought you were a friend, a lover, a relative, but to them, you were also a spiritual crutch, the one who helped them avoid the question, who am I without this person? When you go silent, they don't just face your absence, they face their own emptiness. Carl Jung once said, "We meet each other as masks and part as truths." Withdrawal is the act of taking off the mask. It is your silent way of saying, I will no longer play a role in your narrative. And that, more than anything, unsettles them, not because you were too important, but because you had unknowingly occupied a vital space in their emotional balance. They begin to wonder, was I too dependent? Was I using them to avoid something in myself? But instead of answering those questions, most people retaliate with anger, blame, and by painting you as the villain. It's how they avoid facing their deepest fear, the internal incompleteness you had unconsciously helped them cover with a veil. So withdrawal isn't merely a personal act, it's an earthquake in relationships built on illusion. It sends shockwaves not because of love lost, but because of power. You had been holding a piece of their emotional equilibrium, and now you've taken your hand away. This is not punishment, nor is it manipulation. It is a bell of awakening when you no longer exist as they need. They are forced to meet themselves, and that is a pain with no anesthetic, because it doesn't come from an external loss, but from an internal collapse. You see, many people say they miss you, but what they're really feeling is confusion. They don't miss you as a named person. They miss the sense of safety you once brought, the role you played as an extension of themselves. And that is what truly terrifies them, that you didn't just leave, you took with you a piece of their psychological stability. Withdrawal, when done from clarity and without resentment, can be a profound act of liberation. Not only for you, but for them, because in the void you leave behind lies the opportunity for them to ask, what have I been avoiding within myself? And sometimes, the best thing you can do for someone is not to stay and heal them, but to withdraw, so they're forced to face themselves without you as their mirror. No one can truly see themselves when their image is constantly reflected through another's gaze. But when you disappear, when the mirror is gone, the confrontation begins. They may never say thank you, they may be angry, blame you, or even vilify you in the stories they tell. But that doesn't matter, because what you leave behind is not harm but opportunity. And sometimes, the only thing that can awaken a soul long asleep in dependency is emptiness. And you, the one who had the courage to walk away, are the one who planted the seed of that awakening. 2. The invisible role. You're not who they need, you're the image they project. There's a painful truth that very few people are brave enough to face in most relationships. People don't truly love you, they love the role you unconsciously play. They don't see you as a complex, vibrant, contradictory human being. They see in you a reflection of their needs, their fears, and the parts of themselves that haven't yet healed. You may think you are trusted, needed, loved, but try stepping back, try changing, and you'll see what they need is not you, but the role you've been filling. They love the stability you bring, the listening you offer, the comfort you silently absorb. But none of that is because they see you, it's because you fit a void inside their psyche. Have you ever noticed when you're sad, tired, or no longer the pleasant version of yourself, that the people who loved you start drifting away? That's because you've fallen out of character. You're no longer the comforting mirror they used to reflect what they needed to believe. They need you to be strong, so they can be fragile. They need you to be calm, so they can be anxious. They need you to listen, so they don't have to face their own inner voice. And when you stop meeting those needs, you are no longer useful. Carl Jung once said, "People don't see you as you are, they see you as they are." And for that reason, you are not just a person in a relationship, you're a mirror. A crutch, a projection. The painful part is, when they view you as a tool for their emotional survival, you are gradually severed from your own right to exist authentically. They don't need your honesty, they need your consistency. They don't need you to be true to your emotions, they need you to be agreeable. They don't need you to grow, they need you to stay in the role they assigned you. And because of that, even when you feel tired, hurt, or simply wish to be yourself, you feel as if you're not allowed, because you know, if you change, you'll disrupt their balance, you'll collapse a role, you'll break the mirror they used to gaze into, and you've learned how to sacrifice yourself in order to preserve that structure. That is not love, that is emotional dependency, where you become a tool serving someone else's psychological survival. The irony is, people will never outright say, "I'm using you to avoid facing myself," but they will react harshly when you withdraw, when you stop syncing with their rhythm. They'll call you cold, selfish, or change, not because they understand you, but because you no longer fit the script they wrote. But remember this, you were not born to be someone's projection. You have your own life, your own voice, a rich inner world worthy of protection and respect. You are not obligated to keep someone else feeling whole if it means you must shatter yourself. When you dare to withdraw, when you step out of the role, you may be misunderstood, badmouthed, or even rejected, but stand firm, because that is the first step toward reclaiming your right to simply be. When you refuse to serve as a reflective surface, you are no longer someone's extension, you return to yourself. And when that space opens in their life, only one thing remains: the truth that they've never truly faced themselves. They only borrowed you to temporarily conceal that fact. You cannot save anyone by losing yourself, and you do not need to be sweet, agreeable, or predictable just to remain in someone's life. True love does not begin with reflection, it begins with the meeting of two whole individuals. And if someone only loves you when you're in character, then they don't love you. They love control. Stepping out of that role is not just an act of courage. It is a quiet declaration: I am no longer an image in your mind. I am me, and I am coming home to myself. Free. The price of withdrawal: when you leave, they reconstruct their memory of you. When you withdraw, what breaks first is not affection, but the psychological structure the other person had built around you. And to cope with that absence, the human mind resorts to a remarkably intricate mechanism. It begins rewriting the story. Not to understand you, but to survive the void you left behind. You might think they will remember you as you were, but no, they will remember you as you needed to be. Because your withdrawal doesn't just create an external gap, it reaches something deeper: their internal sense of helplessness in maintaining control over the shared narrative. As long as you were present, despite all differences, they could still manage the way you existed in their life. But when you disappear, they lose that control over your image, and that's when they begin to do what human psychology always does, rewrite the memory. People do not remember each other by the truth. They remember each other in whatever way their emotions need to in order to make the memory more bearable, less chaotic. So when you walk away, they will restructure you to fit the new emotional framework, either sanctify you in longing or vilify you in self-defense. The insecure will say, they left because they never cared. The regretful will whisper, I lost the kindest person I ever knew. The anxious will scream inwardly, it's my fault. I wasn't good enough. No memory remains intact after a withdrawal, because each person must piece together an image of you to save themselves. Carl Jung once said, we do not see others as they are, but as we are, and once you're gone, that need still exists, but you no longer do. So what do? They create a new version of you in their memory, not to understand, but to shield themselves. This may hurt you, seeing someone who was once so close now speak of you as a stranger, or worse. A villain is a deeply painful experience, but you must understand, what they are saying isn't about you. It's about the fracture in their own inner world. Your withdrawal has touched old wounds, abandonment, disappointment, the fear of being unloved, and to cope, they place you in the most emotionally manageable role, either too good to stay, or so cruel they dared to leave. Neither is truly you, it's them, trying to narrate their way out of chaos. You may be a light in one person's memory, but a shadow in another's, and you cannot control that. You can only control one thing, your own journey. And here lies the crux of it. The price of withdrawal is not being misunderstood. It is having to let go of the need to be understood at all. We often want to walk away, yet still be remembered with the love we once received. But that is a contradiction, because once you withdraw, you are no longer there to manage the story they tell about you. And that requires a quiet kind of bravery, the bravery to be misrepresented, misunderstood, mislabeled. But remember, if you stay merely to protect your image, you will forever be a hostage in someone else's story. Withdrawal, when born of awareness, is not abandonment, it is liberation. And if someone must turn you into the villain to feel better about their loss, that is a reflection of their unhealed weakness, not a reflection of your truth. You are not the rewritten version. You are the one who chose to return to yourself, and that needs no validation from anyone's agreement, because there are parts that do not come to cause pain, but to clarify, who truly understood us, and who merely loved the image they constructed. And if your withdrawal forces someone to reconstruct an entire portion of their emotional life, please don't see that as cruelty. See it as a silent invitation. It's time for you to learn how to exist without having to control others just to feel whole. 4. The space you once held, deeper than you think. When you were present in someone's life, you were not just a person, you were a pillar, a rhythm, a part of their emotional space so familiar that they didn't even notice it. And only when you withdraw, only when the emptiness appears, do they begin to feel how profoundly you had been there. The space you once held was never physical. It was the psychological territory you left imprints on in everyday conversations. In the calmness of their gaze when you were around, in the quiet sense that everything is okay simply because you were there. You were the one they turned to when they needed to be heard, the one they subconsciously considered in their decisions, the one they always assumed would still be there, and because your presence was so constant, so taken for granted when you left. They didn't just lose you, they lost a part of their internal reference system deeply embedded in their emotional world. People only begin to feel emptiness when the habit is broken, and the greatest habit is not action, but invisible attachment, a short message, a quick reply, a presence that, though silent, brought comfort. When all of that is taken away, what remains is not silence, but chaos, because the void you leave behind is not just an absence, it's the collapse of an emotional structure. Imagine it like this: in a familiar room, you were the chair someone always sat in when tired, the lamp that stayed on each night to soften the darkness, something not flashy, but so essential that no one ever thought to question its importance. And then one day, you disappear, no announcement, no drama, you're just no longer there. At first, everything seems fine, but soon, they no longer know where to sit when they need rest, no longer have that small light when night falls, and they begin to feel, not you, but the disorientation within themselves. The space you leave forces them to face an uncomfortable truth. that they had relied on you more than they admitted, that their sense of stability didn't entirely come from within, but had been partly maintained by you. And this is the most profound part of withdrawal. It doesn't hurt them only because they lost you, but because they realized they were missing their own foundation. When you were still there, you were like a second heartbeat. They didn't need to check if they were okay, because you were doing it for them. They didn't need to tune into their emotions because you helped regulate them. You became part of their emotional ecosystem, one they didn't even know they had become dependent on. So when you leave, they're thrown off, they lose their balance, and sometimes they're angry with you not because you did something wrong, but because you forced them to confront the fragility they had long kept hidden. You see, there's no need to say a word to shake someone. You only need to leave at the right time, and that's what makes some people unable to forgive you, not because you were cruel, but because your withdrawal accidentally exposed the weakness they never wanted to face. In many relationships, you may have believed you were just a supporting role, but when you leave, the other's reaction reveals you are far more central than you ever thought. And now comes the paradox you must accept. You cannot control how others face the emptiness you leave behind. Some will be grateful for it as a chance to grow. Others will resent it as a betrayal. But whichever they choose, it does not define you. You are not someone's eternal crutch. You are simply someone who once gave the gift of presence and then learned how to reclaim space for yourself. Because everyone must learn how to hold up their own life, and if your absence forces them to finally do that, then perhaps the gift you left behind was never hurt, but silent growth. 5. The dark side of connection. When the relationship is built not on love, but on dependency, there's an uncomfortable truth few dare to face. Not all bonds are built on love. Many relationships, no matter how beautifully they're labeled as soulmate, best friend, lover, or family, aren't rooted in pure affection, but in a complex mix of fear, lack, and the desperate need to cling to something, dependency. Have you ever asked yourself why you can't leave someone who no longer fits your life? Why do you continue conversations that have long since dried up? Or why do you feel anxious when they don't reply to your message for hours? That's not love, that's dependency, cloaked in the glittering costume of connection. Dependency differs from love in one core way. Love is freedom with conscious choice, while dependency is the fear of being abandoned. A dependent relationship always requires at least one person to compromise part of themselves just to stay. They shrink their dreams, silence their emotions, suspend their intuition, just to preserve the connection. Because if that connection is lost, they don't just lose someone, they lose the familiar psychological structure they've used to define themselves. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." In dependent relationships, the unconscious is what governs most behaviors. You think you're in love, but in truth, you're terrified of losing the emotional anchor that person represents. The defining trait of such bonds is this: the deeper it goes, the more it erodes, because they don't love you for who you are. They need you as a crutch to lean on, a mirror to reflect themselves. They need you to feel valuable, to have a role, to hold meaning, but try letting go, and they'll collapse. And then they'll blame you, resent you, hate you, not because you did wrong, but because you forced them to stand on their own. Dependency is a form of soft control. It doesn't scream, command, or threaten. It simply makes you feel guilty for being yourself. When you try to pull away, it whispers, "Don't be selfish. They need you." When you express your real emotions, it says, "Tone it down. Don't hurt their feelings." You think you're preserving the relationship, but in truth, you're slowly sacrificing pieces of yourself just to continue being someone else's emotional support. And when you do withdraw, the truth surfaces. The relationship can't stand without you. The affection can't sustain itself without someone to carry the unhealed pain of the other person. That's when you come to a painful but necessary realization. Some bonds are built not on love, but on roles. And once that role no longer aligns with who you are, it becomes a burden. You weren't born to be a supporting character in someone else's story. You're not responsible for holding up the hollow spaces in someone's soul, especially if doing so leaves you empty. Withdrawal, in this case, isn't a denial of love. It's a silent declaration: I will no longer be a substitute for what you must learn to heal yourself. And that act, though it may earn you accusations of coldness or apathy, is the first step toward true love, love for yourself. We cannot teach others to stand if we keep standing in their place. Just as we cannot help someone mature if we're always there to shield them from their fear of being left behind. Some attachments must be undone to be healed. Some connections must be released for growth to occur. And some feelings, to become true love, must be separated from dependency. Remember this. You are not wrong for walking away from a dependent relationship. You're simply doing what few dare to do, ending the false role so both of you can begin to live honestly. 6. When you become a symbol, ambiguity makes you unforgettable. There's a strange paradox in human emotion. Sometimes, what makes someone unforgettable isn't their constant presence, but their silent withdrawal. When you walk away, when you cut off a connection without accusations, without blame, without displaying pain, you leave behind a void that cannot be defined, and it is precisely that ambiguity that makes it impossible to forget. Presence can become familiar, but absence makes people reflect. Every time they try to forget, their mind brings up new questions. Why did you leave? Did I miss something? Did you hurt too? Do you still remember? The more elusive the answers, the more those questions repeat themselves. And you, the one who walked away in silence, suddenly become a symbol, no longer a concrete person, but a feeling, an unresolved space. Carl Jung once wrote, "What is not made conscious will appear as fate." When you vanish without leaving an explanation, you force the other person to enter the uncharted territory of their unconscious. You become their personal myth, a missing piece they can never fully understand, yet can never truly ignore. People may forget those who are clear, but they are haunted by those who remain vague, because ambiguity keeps the story open, and an unfinished story always draws the reader back. In psychology, this is known as the Zeigarnik effect. Humans tend to remember incomplete experiences more than those that have been resolved. A conversation left hanging, an emotion left unspoken, a separation without closure, all of these keep you, though withdrawn, alive as an undercurrent in someone's memory. You are no longer physically there, but they see you in distracted glances, in familiar words, in an old song that plays unexpectedly. They may never say your name, but your name has now become a kind of offbeat rhythm in their heart. Not because you did anything grand, but because you withdrew quietly, at the perfect moment, and that silence becomes a symbol in itself. You become something they can't reorganize in their memory. They can't label you as good or bad, as a victim or a deserter, as a lover or a stranger. You defy all categories, and because of that, you remain longer in the subconscious than anyone who showed up clearly. A symbol, at its core, is not a specific person, but an image that carries meaning beyond logic. When you withdraw in silence, you are no longer you. You become a symbol of maturity they haven't reached, of courage they have yet to face, of a no they've never dared say to others, or to themselves. You are a reminder of something deeper, a part of them you once awakened. And now, even though you're gone, that echo still lingers. Here's the irony. You don't need to try to be remembered. You don't need to leave a mark intentionally. It's because you don't try, don't demand, don't show up, that you become irreplaceable. Because a role can be replaced, but a depth that was never fully understood cannot be. They may find someone who resembles you, but no one will replicate the silence you left behind. So when you walk away from a connection that is no longer healthy, don't think you've disappeared. Sometimes, disappearing is the most powerful form of presence, because you become the lesson they'll have to contemplate for years to come. A lesson with no footnotes, an ending without a period. A person turned symbol, not for doing something monumental, but for having the strength to walk away when they were still trying to hold on. 7. The two-way transformation. You change too, but in a different direction. Withdrawal isn't just a gesture that leaves a void in someone else's world. It's also a quiet but profound turning point in your own inner journey. We often assume that in the act of leaving, the one left behind is the one who suffers, the one forced to grapple with silence, emptiness, and unanswered questions, but a rarely acknowledged truth is this: the person who walks away also changes. The difference is that transformation happens in the opposite direction, less chaotic, perhaps, but no less intense, the path of returning to oneself. In existential psychology, withdrawing from a relationship that no longer aligns with your essence that no longer nourishes your inner life, is viewed as an act of reclaiming personal sovereignty. It is not an act of escape, it is an act of choice. When you decide to let go, you are saying to yourself, I deserve to live authentically. Withdrawal is a silent declaration. I no longer wish to exist as a shadow in someone else's narrative. I am tired of being the one who adjusts emotions, who acts as a pillar, as a mirror for the parts they dare not face. I have lived too long in the energy field of endurance, and now it is time to return to the light of inner honesty. The strange thing is, when you withdraw from a relationship, a connection, or a space that once held deep meaning, you don't just leave a gap in the other person's life, you also leave a piece of yourself behind. And in those early days, you may feel unsteady, empty, as if a familiar part of you has just been dismantled, but it's precisely in that void that something begins to rebuild, quietly, unceremoniously, like a tiny seed pushing up through the soil. You start to hear your inner voice again, the one that had been drowned out by other people's noise. You begin to feel the simplicity of being, the stillness, the breath, the joy of not having to reply to someone right away. Slowly, you relearn how to be alone without feeling abandoned, and bit by bit, you reclaim sovereignty over your own emotional space. This is not some cinematic rebirth. It's more like stitching yourself back together, piece by piece. Those parts drained and scattered when you kept holding onto a connection that no longer reflected who you truly were. The pain of the one left behind lies in having to face the emptiness you leave. Your pain lies in having to face yourself. You can no longer blame anyone else. You're no longer preoccupied with managing someone else's feelings. You no longer reinforce your self-worth through the role of being the dependable one. Instead, you're forced to confront the question, if I no longer have someone to accommodate, to protect, to serve, then who am I? That question, at first disorienting, becomes, day by day, a cleansing force. It sweeps away the dust that had clouded your mirror of self. You begin to see yourself more clearly, not through the lens of someone else's expectations, not through a role or title, but as a person with emotions, desires, boundaries, and the long-silenced longings of your own. This is a change marked by liberation, and unlike the chaotic restructuring happening in the one you left, your transformation unfolds from within, with direction, with depth, and with clarity. You don't need to rewrite their character to soothe yourself. You don't need to retell the story in your favor to escape guilt. You only need to return to yourself, the self you lost while orbiting around someone else's needs. It's not a change that looks like triumph, but it is a quiet kind of victory, a triumph over your fear of being alone, over your habit of people-pleasing, and over the need to always explain your decisions. Withdrawal isn't the end, it's the beginning of a new way of being. No longer defined by reflection, no longer straining to maintain someone else's rhythm, no longer living to keep others at ease, but living so that you, finally, can be free. Withdrawal, no matter how silent, always leaves an echo, not one that rings out loud in the world, but one that resounds within the heart of the one who remains. No one wants to admit it, but the space you leave behind unsettles them, not just because they've lost you, but because they've lost a part of the psychological structure they once leaned on. What they miss is not necessarily love, it's control, it's familiarity, it's the role you once quietly filled. And when that disappears, they are forced to confront a deeper truth. Have I really been living through someone else? As for you, you are no longer the person you were, but your transformation didn't come from chaos, it came from clarity. No longer needing to be understood, no longer fearing being misunderstood. You've learned how to be present without being physically there, learned that not reacting is a form of response, learned how to choose yourself, without asking for permission. In the end, withdrawal is not an ending. It is a declaration, a quiet yet resolute statement. I will no longer stay just to be loved in the way others find convenient. I walk away to relearn how to love myself on my own terms.